Cool. So let's see here. What's going to be the best way to do this? Probably pop out my chat so I can see that. Wait, can I not pop it out? There it is. Pop out. Then I will grab this. Probably should have configured this before going live, but it's whatever. And the pop out. Cool. All right, so today I'm going to be learning about Next.js, and so I'm pretty much just using the very basic getting started guide. So if I post it in chat here, you can see that essentially it's just on the nextjs.org, learn basics, getting started. So I'm just going to go through that, and I'm going to see how far I can get tonight. And if I get all the way through tonight, awesome. If I don't, I'll pick it up tomorrow, and we'll see where we go from there. So I guess the first part I'll jump into is the why behind it, right? So with a lot of JavaScript, especially React, it is a lot of client-side rendering, right? So we send a JavaScript bundle across the wire, and it's on the client to then download that, execute the script, and then that's when we will actually display the UI. So generally you'll get some sort of like blank screen or something like that. Back when the predominant way of doing this, or the predominant way of serving up applications, was using PHP, it was all server-side rendered. So you would make a request to the server, and the page would come fully populated over to the client in their browser, and they would just have an already populated page, essentially, right? So that's kind of what Next.js is trying to do with the React library. So this will take and make it a little bit easier to do server-side rendering with React. And it's possible without Next.js to do that. Obviously, you can do what's called like an isomorphic application, I believe is what it's called, where you do the initial population and the initial rendering on the server. So when you serve it up, it looks like the fully rendered page, and then you hydrate it with the data on the client side once the client side JavaScript is loaded up. So it's a little bit of half and half, but this one, it looks like it is mostly server side. So that's what I will be jumping into today. And I'm starting in just the very basic get started. So the very first part is obviously the setup. So I'm just going to follow along exactly. I'm going to make a directory just like they will on here called hello next. Not hell next. Hopefully it's not hell. Then we'll cd into there, and then we'll init the project essentially. So that just the -y essentially just says do all the defaults. If you would normally just do npm init, you'll have to press enter or change all those things, but we're fine with the defaults for right now, and the package JSON will be just like any other package JSON. Then we need to install React DOM, and Next itself. So we will use npm to install and save. I don't think I need the dash save anymore, so I'll just do npm I React DOM Next. Yep, so we can see that popping in, and while we're waiting, I will also just open this folder here. Actually, I guess I have to wait for this to download, and then I can open this folder. Let's see here. There we go. Hello next. That may have stopped the download. So yeah, not sure exactly where that went, so I will run that again. So same thing I was just doing. And we should see it actually update this package.json, which is what we want to see. We will see that it pops it into the dependencies. And I'll read ahead a little bit here. And the next step we're going to do is we're actually going to make a directory called pages. And then it tells me to open the package.json file and replace scripts with the following. So you can see that the scripts that we have right now comes with the default test. So we'll go ahead and delete that out. And what it wants us to do is it wants us to make one called dev, one called build, and one called start. So we'll just do the dev. I'll actually wait a second until... there we go. So now you can see our dependencies are in here, and we'll delete this out now. So it looks like dev will just run the next binary. Build will run next with the build parameter or the build argument. Then start will run it as next start. So I guess we will see what those do in just a little bit. So it says now everything is ready. Run the following command to start the server. So we can just run npm run dev. I'll clear this out. And this will actually run that one that we just put in that's just called next. And we'll see the output. And it gives us an error. Let's see here. Couldn't find a pages directory. So, yep, I forgot to do that. So we will make our pages directory, and then we will run our dev again. It looks like it's going to serve it up on localhost 3000. So I'm going to pop this open here. We can check this out. Oops, not 300. 3000. And we get a 404. This page could not be found, which I think is what we're expecting here. So, yep, at the bottom it has a little quiz where it says what's the output you see on the screen. Error, no page found. 404, this page could not be found. Hello, Next.js. Hello, world. And it looks like we are getting the 404. This page could not be found. So I clicked that, and it looks like that is what we are supposed to be seeing right now. Cool. So the first part on here is talking about creating our own, or our first page. So we'll create a file named index.js under the pages directory. It looks like this might be hot reloading, so I'm actually going to leave this open. And I think I'm going to split this and add a new one, so that way I can do things like touch pages and index.js, and then we can just open that now. Cool. And it looks like what it's going to give us. Oh, yep, so it is going to try and hot reload, and it looks like it's crashing repeatedly right now just because we are not exporting anything, which is fine. We will do that right now. So it looks like we're just going to be exporting a default function here called index. Looks like their style is to have it as like a capital I. I'm not a big fan of that, but whatever. And we will return some basic JSX here. So we're going to create a div in this p tag, and we're going to have hello next.js. Let's go ahead and save that, and we can see that it compiled successfully. Let's pop this open now, and there it is. So it looks like that will be our index page itself. So yeah, it says here we've exported a simple React component from the pages index.js module. Likewise, you could write your own React component and export it. All right, cool. Make sure your React component is the default export. So it looks like it is looking for that. Now try to prompt a syntax error in your index page. Here's an example, and they just pretty much removed the closing p tag here, so we will do that and we'll see what happens. So it's going to do a compilation, it looks like, so the hot reload compile, and then we're just going to get this, and it's going to tell us unterminated JSX contents, which is what we'd expect. It says what will happen to the app loaded when there is a problem. So actually, let's go ahead and remove that one more time just so we can see. So here it's going to give us just a failed to compile. So the options they have here is that nothing happened, there's an error with page not found, there's an error showing the syntax error, and there's an error with 500 internal error. So we're going to go ahead and do the, there's an error showing the syntax. Cool. And I realize I probably should just have this over here instead of off the screen like that. It's good for me to review it over there. So you can see this is what we just did right here. I just submitted that. Cool. So handling errors. By default, Next.js will track errors like these and show it in the browser. This helps you identify errors and fix them quickly. Once you fix the issues, the page will appear instantly without a full page reload. We do this with the help of Webpack's hot module replacement facility, which is supported in Next.js by default. So it looks like it is using Webpack under the hood, which is pretty cool. And I'll be curious to see if we can dive a little deeper into Webpack and have a little bit more fine-grained control. It's cool that it's using it, but I'll be curious if there's like an escape hatch or something like that, because right now it's all hidden behind that Next.js, or the Next.js implementation, essentially. So cool, we're awesome now. We've did it, guys. That was a good stream. No, just kidding. What do you think? If you like it, let's dive deeper. If not, just let us know. So this seems fine. We will look at how to navigate between pages now. Just gonna take a sip real quick while I read this first part. Okay, so now we know how to create a simple Next.js app and run it. Our simple app only has a single page, but we can add as many pages as we want. For example, we can create an about page by adding the following content to the directory pages in a file called about.js. And it looks like it is just another basic function that's being exported, and it returns just some basic JSX again. So we can easily implement that. Easy. Let's fix this so it's no longer broken. Oops, it's hard for me to type. I moved a microphone right between me and the keyboard, so I'm typing a little different. So please excuse the mistakes. And again, we just returned some basic JSX. This is the about page. Cool. Then we can access that page with going to about. So we're back on our home page, and then if we do a /about, this is the about page. Cool. That's very easy, very nice. So that is really cool right out of the box, because that's not normally something you get right out of the box. If you're just doing a pure React application, right? So normally you'd need to use something like a React router, which has a bit of a learning curve, right? And especially if you used it in the past and you're on a newer version, you might be looking at it thinking like, wow, there was a lot of changes from React Router version 2 to React Router version 4, and you pretty much have to relearn everything. And it's just one of those things where it's not the most intuitive thing for such a basic function, right? Like if you're going to spend a lot of time learning a library, you would hope that it does more than just some basic page routing. So it's really cool that this is just it out of the box, right? So my first thing that I'm curious about is if I just change these to like index and about, right? Oops. What is that? I never save it all. So it's Control KS. So Control KS. We'll save all. I'm curious if that breaks anything, having it lowercase like that. Doesn't look like it. I'm not sure. I guess I'll just leave it the way they have it, right? Not a big deal, but in my own applications, when I do this, I'll probably reconsider and might name things a little bit different. Okay, after that, we need to connect these pages. We could use an HTML anchor tag, for that. However, it won't perform client-side navigation. Instead, the browser will do a request to the server for the next page and refresh the page, which is not what we want. So this is kind of what I was talking about earlier, where you have this isomorphic behavior, right? So you have the server do the initial heavy load, which is going to be serving up this page initially when we hit the route. So if you were to deep dive directly to localhost 3000/about, it'll do the work and it'll actually generate that page and give it to us. But once it's on our client side, which is where it would be once it's served up, we want to let the client take care of that, so we're not doing as many server calls. That's good on bandwidth, good on speed, and it's kind of the solution to solve the initial page load problem while also reducing the need to make more server calls, which is always good, right? So let's see what they have here. So in order to support client-side navigation, we need to use Next.js's link. So link, I would not be surprised if they took this concept from React Router. So kind of what I was just talking about, React Router has this link component as well. And it looks like it is exported via next/link. By using the link component, navigation will happen without a page refresh. So here we go. In order to follow along with this lesson, you need to have a simple Next.js app. For that, continue your work from the previous lesson or download the following example app. So we're already good, so we don't really need that. And we can skip past that. So it looks like it is just a very basic import from Next.link. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. And that looks like it's on the index page. So we will do that here, right? Import link from. Interesting that they have it kind of separated this way. Normally you'd have it like import link from next and link would be inside curly braces because it's not necessarily the default, but it looks like they decided to split it up this way. And then inside of here now, we can add this anchor about page and wrap it inside a link. I'm wondering if this anchor tag is necessary or if that's just for stylization purposes here. We could try both, I guess. And then here's just that hello next.js that we already put. So it looks like the format here is just going to be link href, and then about, right? I guess they put about page, but I'm just gonna leave about, right? So, and here it is. So we have that style, we click it, and cool, we're there. I don't know if this will give us much here. So we have network. If we just do this, we can see the initial page load. If we do /about, we can see that it is serving up this about. But if we go back to the home page again and we click about, looks like it's doing that, but it says initiator other. So I'm confused about that a little bit. Let's see if that was just for stylization or not. So we'll go back to this page. Yeah, it looks like it is. It's been a little bit. Jar all. So if we do this, we see it loads up all these other things, right? We do that, we see that it loads them all up again, and that's what we're really wanting to avoid, right? So we come here. Again, let's do that so you can see we do the initial load. We do that, and it's a much smaller load. So perfect. We like to see that. Again, not sure why they. Okay, let's see. Okay, warning. You're using a string directly inside link. This usage has been deprecated. Please add an A tag as a child of link. So I guess they prefer having it as an A tag. I'm not quite sure why, to be honest. That'll be something to look into in the future for sure. All right, so now that we've imported next link as link and use it like this, cool. Then click the About Page link. It'll navigate you to the About Page. This is client-side navigation. The action takes place in the browser without making a request to the server. You can verify this by opening your browser's network request inspector. Cool, we were ahead of the curve. We already looked at that to confirm all of that. Okay, now we have a simple task for you. Visit the local page, click on the About Page, then hit your browser's back button. How would you best describe the experience of the back button? All right, let's figure that out. So I'm actually going to open up a new one here. We click About, we click the back page. I don't know if we need to have the network log open or not for that. How would we? So the back button, I mean, it did see, right? Cool. So it looks like, yeah, client-side history support is right out of the box too. So that's another thing that something normally like React Router would give you, which you'd have to kind of roll your own implementation and infrastructure around. So when you hit the back button, it navigates the page to the index page entirely via the client. Nextlink does all the location.history handling for you. You don't need to write a single line of client-side routing code. Simply link pages. It just works. So that's pretty cool. That's a pretty big advantage, especially if you're just trying to get something up and running, to not have to deal with that. Maybe in a future stream, if anyone's interested, we can take a look at React Router and kind of do a compare and contrast, see what it would take to get it up and running, just so if anyone's curious about that, they can have a reference point. All right, adding link props. So you may need to add attributes or props to your links for a number of reasons. Perhaps you need to add a title attribute to the link. We can add it like this. So anchor title, about page, about page. Once we add this, you can see that the rendered anchor tag gets the title attribute, about page, added onto it. How about doing this instead? All right, so let's see what the initial attribute of just title, and we'll even call it about page here. So maybe they added the anchor tag for accessibility reasons, which I think would be a good one. Let's inspect this. So we have this, and we can see that it has the title of about page, and it has the href of about. Cool. And then it looked like the other one was essentially the same thing, just added to the link itself, right? Yep. I would expect it to be the same thing. Okay, so we don't actually see it there. I can't imagine order mattering, because if it's a component, it really shouldn't matter. It's just a prop, right? Wait, what? Okay, so I tried to compile it. Failed prop title link, unknown prop found title. Was that on refresh that I got that? No. Maybe I just get it the one time, right? So it was trying to tell me to try that, but it did not apply the title, and it showed an error in the console. All right. So I think they were just trying to show that you don't add the attributes to the link, you add it to the anchor tag itself, which is fine. I don't know how I feel about that kind of tutorial style, but it's whatever. Cool. Link is just a wrapper component. Actually, the title prop on the link component has no effect. That's because link is just a wrapper component which only accepts href and some similar props. Probably would be nice if they just kind of showed what some of the similar props are here instead of us just imagining it. But we can dig into that if we need to. If you need to add props to it, you need to add them to its child. In this case, the link of the child of the link component is the anchor tag. All right, easy enough. Link is simple but powerful. Here we've only looked at the basic usage of Nextlink. There are some interesting ways to use it, and we'll learn about them in upcoming lessons. Cool. So the routing documentation, it looks like it's going to have a lot more information on that. Cool. Well, I'm sure we will be looking at these docs as we dive into trying to actually create an application with this after all this learning is done. All right, using shared components. So I wonder if this is going to be kind of showing how to have a shared header, right? So right now we have that about, and it would be cool if we could just reuse that and have it not re-rendered every time, right? So that's kind of one of the advantages of React, right? Especially on the client side, is that if you have something, you're only changing parts of the page, right? You're not doing full page refreshes. And when you have something anchored to the top, like a navigation bar, so like this one right here, like the features learn docs showcase, and you want that shown on every single page, you don't want to re-render that every single time, especially when you're doing client-side rendering, right? That's kind of the point of client-side rendering. So I'm thinking that's what this use shared components is all about. So it says we know that Next.js is all about pages. We can create a page by exporting a React component and putting that component inside the pages directory. Then we'll have a fixed URL based on the file name. Okay, so the URL is based off the file name. So I think if I made that file name a capital A about, then it would have been that. Since exported pages are JavaScript modules, we can import other JavaScript components into them as well. Of course, that makes sense. This is a feature you'd expect from any JavaScript framework. In this lesson, we'll create a common header component and use it in multiple pages. Finally, we'll look at implementing a layout component and see how it can help us define the look for multiple pages. All right, so it looks like the common header is what I was kind of talking about, and then the layout will be some sort of like portal into changing around it, so that way we don't have to re-render everything. So we don't need to do that. So we need to create a header component. So we're going to create a new directory called components, and we're going to create something called header.js. So let's do that. Make dir components, right? Yeah. So we have that file open now, and it's going to need a link. Looks like it's going to have an object that describes what the link style is, and then it's going to be a functional component here that we're just calling header, and then we will export it as the default at the end. So let's import cool, and then this other one, like we just said, it was the link style. With just the margin right, okay? Oops, not there. So this looks like this is going to be some sort of CSS style. I'll be curious to see what they're using under the hood for CSS. But this is also a common thing that you'll see in a lot of JavaScript JavaScript that implements CSS. I don't know if that makes sense, but normally you'd have like margin dash right if you're writing CSS, but that's not a valid property name on an object. So you'll see that it's usually just this kind of camel case, right? So you write normally, and then where it would be a hyphen, you just do a uppercase letter instead, and that's how we're getting that. And then okay, so it looks like it's just true functional, and it's going to be a div, and it's going to be the home and the about, and it's going to have a style. So style equals link style. This will be home. This is the about. that was all right. So yeah, home, about, link, and then like they were saying before, you have to export as the default. So we will export default header. And now we can see everything's being used. Cool. So this component contains 2 links to the pages available in our app. We've also styled it a bit to make it easy to visualize. Next, let's import this component and use it in our pages. So for the index.js page, it'll look like this. We're going to import header from components header, and then we're going to throw it up there where we had it before. So, oops, wrong button. So now we don't need this anymore, right? Because we're not actually using the link directly. So we will import header from here, and we will delete all of this, and then we'll do header. All right, you can do the same for the about.js page as well. So we will do the same thing. I'll move that around real quick. And we'll add it right here. Cool. So now if we navigate back, we should see both of them. Cool. So we do see both of them here. And if we click about, we go to the about page. If we click home, we go back to the home page. Cool. So now we have the shared ones. So like I was saying, this is kind of what's styling that. So if we change this down to a 5, for example, we'd expect this to get closer. And that's what happened. Oops, not a dot, comma. And you can see color, as you'd expect, changes that as well. So you just add a new property for each style that you want to add. And in this case, I just added color green. Cool. Let's try to make some simple modifications to our application. Stop the running app, rename the components directory to comps, import the header from comps header instead of components header, start the app again. Will it work? I mean, it should, right? Seems like something it should do. I guess we can do it real quick, not a big deal. So we kill the server here. Rename this to comps. Looks like my editor was nice enough to actually do that for us, so cool. Always nice when that happens. Looks like it's serving it up just fine. Cool. Compiled successfully. And it looks like it still works just fine, as we'd expect. So while I think that Next looks for something specifically called pages, obviously it does not care about comps because it's just our directory that we made. I will rename that though, again, to components, because comps doesn't make much sense here. And it looks like it reloaded anyways while it was up and running. Yep. So will it work? Yes. Yes, it will. The component directory. Yes, it will work as expected. We do not need to put our components in a special directory. The directory can be named anything. The only special directories are pages and public. Okay, so we haven't got to public yet, but good to know that that is another one that we need to have reserved for Next.js. You can even create the components inside the pages directory. I feel like you probably want to avoid that because it sounded like that it will automatically generate a page. So if we made like a header.js component, right, in pages, then we do like /header, I think it would just show up the header, which doesn't make much sense. So I think we'll go ahead and use that components like they have it right now. Okay, so the layout component in our app will use a common style across various pages. For this purpose, we can create a common layout component and use it for each of our pages. Here's an example. Add this content to components/mylayout.js. So we'll create that one real quick. It looks like it's going to import header. It's going to have a layout style again, this time with margin padding and border, and it's going to just have a layout itself, and it looks like it will take props and do props.children. So that right there is just basic React. Again, not really what we're covering right now, but if you have any questions about this, we can kind of dive into it, but for right now it's just props.children. And then it's going to be export default layout. So this is what I mean by kind of like that viewport though. So whatever gets passed in to the props.children here will be rendered right here. So that way we can have this shared header across the board. So let's go ahead and do that. So actually what they call it, a layout style. It has, I'm just going to copy this because I'm lazy when it comes to that. I don't think there's much value in me typing that out, but it has a margin of 20, a padding of 20, and a border of a solid pixel, and it's going to be a little bit gray, essentially, right? So here, the my layout is essentially just, we could call this whatever we want, foo. It's generally a good idea to call it the same as the file though, just for readability and consistency's sake. So I think it was a div, right? So we have this div with the style on the div. Then we have our header, right? Oops. Self-closing. And then it's going to be props.children. So the curly braces essentially will evaluate the JavaScript value, which in this case, children is an array of other components. So what it'll do is it'll add the components that are in children right there. And then, yep, just need to export the default. So you can see here that they called theirs layout, even though they called it my layout. I'm not a big fan of that, so I just called my layout as well for consistency's sake. So once we've done that, we can use this layout in our pages as follows. So it looks like we're going to be importing layout instead of header now. And then you can see that instead of it being a self-closing tag, so like the header we had as a self-closing tag, we're going to pass children to it. In this case, it's just a paragraph. And in this case, it's just another paragraph. So let's go ahead and do those updates real quick. I'm going to move this over here so that way we're a little closer. Then here we're going to go ahead and do my layout. And then let's see, here's Alt. Yeah, cool. Oops, don't know why I did that. Same thing over here. And we're going to change this out as well. Cool. I'm assuming it compiled, but I haven't noticed in a bit, so I'm just going to kick it off real quick so we don't have any issues. Compiled successfully. Cool. Let's pop this open. And you can see here, so yeah, we can tell that this is our layout because we now have this tiny gray box around here. I don't know if that's showing up on stream or not, but we have that, and then now we have our home and our about. But that was weird because it seemed a little slow. Did you catch that? So we pop that open, we click about. Okay, it's a little faster now. I think it may have just been that first pass. All right. Let's pop back over here. Remember, you can access the app. Yep. Localhost 8000. Now let's try removing props.children from the layout and see what happens to the app. What will happen to the app? So as we were talking about, if you think about layout itself, and you can see that it has the gray box all around it, right? And layout itself, if you remember, is a div. So we have our div that has the gray box around it. We have our header, which is this home and about, as we'd expect. And we have the content right here, which is the page itself. So if we remove this, so if I were to comment that out real quick, you'll notice that we will still have the header, right? Because that was not commented out. That is completely different from the props.children. But now the content itself will no longer be there, right? So we refresh it, we click about, we're navigating to the about page. We're navigating back and forth between the home and the about, but the content's no longer showing up. And that's again because, like I said, the curly braces inside of here will take this props, and there's a key on this props called children. And essentially what that is anything that's passed in between. So we have this element, essentially my layout. Anything that's passed in between here is going to be considered a child, right? So by passing this in, this is what's actually being rendered by props.children. So we need that in order to actually see it. And we refresh it and it's back again. Cool. So the content on the page being displayed will be removed. And yeah, so rendering child components. If you remove props.children, the layout cannot render the content we put inside the layout element as shown below. So that would not show up. This is just one way to create a layout component. Here are some other methods of creating a layout component. Layout as a higher order component. So I don't know, I guess that's a slightly more advanced React topic, but it's good for us to look at here. So let's see here. The component is my layout.js. Excuse me. We import our header like we did before. We have a layout style like we did before, and this time it has it's taking it's exporting a function called with layout, right? So before we were returning an element, and the element would take some props, which is a very basic functional component in React, and it would do the props.children. Here, what we're doing is we have a function that returns the element. So we're actually creating this function called with layout. It takes a parameter called page. The page here is expecting it to be an element. So it would either be our about or home page in this case. And it's creating a closure because we are, it's a, not a closure. I'm blanking on the word right now, but essentially it's a function that returns a function. Right, so because JavaScript can be used as functional language and functions are first class, you can pass functions as parameters and you can return functions from functions. So in this case, we are returning a new function that is going to scope page here. So whatever you bind by passing page here, you'll get a function back that can then be invoked with page being used as an element here. And then you can see this is how it would be used inside of here. So you would import this with layout function now. You'd create your page. In this case, it would just be the content, this hello Next.js. And then what you're returning is the invoking of the with layout page, right? So when you call with layout page, you can imagine and substitute this with this right here, or this function, which at this point, this is just a generic React component function, right? And so it'll render it here when it's exported as default. Same thing here. So it just takes the content being passed in, and that is what's being passed to with layout. And then here's the case where the page content is a prop itself. So before we were passing it in as a child, but in theory, again, you could just have any sort of content that renders out here. This could be an array, this could be a single element, and in this case you can see that it is just a single element. So this index page content is just a single element of hello next.js inside the p tags, and it's going to be passed as a prop. So you can see that's layout content equals. So just like we were doing the props earlier with style, right? Or not style. What's a good one? With the link, right? So this href prop, we're passing a value to it. We're doing the same thing, except we're just passing a component as the prop. Pretty straightforward. So these are just a couple different ways you might see stuff. I kind of like the higher order component version, I think. But we'll leave it as it is for right now. I'm just going to take a drink real quick. So they've mentioned 2 use cases for shared components as common header components as layouts. You can use components for styling, page layouts, and any other task you like. Additionally, you can import components from NPM modules and use them. So we can make use of the wide array of the ecosystem that's out there. If we find something that we like, we should be able to use it as we see fit. All right, so on to dynamic pages. Now we know how to create a basic Next.js app with multiple pages. In order to create a page, we have to create an actual file on the disk. Yep. However, in a real app, we need to create pages dynamically in order to display dynamic content. There are many approaches to do that with Next.js. We'll start creating dynamic pages by using query strings. We'll be creating a simple blog app. It has a list of all the posts on the home index, or on the home page, which is our index. When you click on a post title, you'll be able to see the individual post on its own view. Cool. So let's build that app. First of all, try to download the following app. Do I want to do that? Let's see, components, my layout, link. No, I mean, this should be fine, right? So we just need to make some minor changes. All right, so first of all, let's add the list of post titles in the home page, add the following content to the page's index.js. So it looks like it is still just doing the layout the first way, so that's good. So we don't have to change anything for that. And it has a link now, so we need to re-import link. I always like to import the stuff from like external libraries first. I don't know if there's like a preference among most people, but then I kind of do like the external libraries or like the main ones. So if I had to import React and stuff like that, it usually goes towards the top. Then it'd be like Next would probably be next, ironically, just because it's kind of a major part of this application. And then I would import my own content, and then finally I'd probably import CSS all the way at the bottom if I had any external style sheets I was pulling in for this. And I usually like to kind of throw a space in there. It's just a nice little readability thing on my in my opinion. So here it looks like they have this this functional component right here that takes props and it returns a list item, and that list item has a link, which it looks like this is what they're talking about for the query string. So we have a post and it takes the title as the value, and the props will have that title, and then the link itself will actually be the title. So it's pretty straightforward. So let's write that out. So that was a li. It's going to be a link. Oops. href. I'll come back to that in just a second. I think it was props. Again, anything that needs to kind of be rendered or pulled out, you put inside these curly braces here. And then it looks like, so here we need to add the curly braces because it's not just a string, it's the string interpolation. So what this is going to do is it's going to take the title and it's going to create the string /posts and then add the query param of title to whatever that title is. All right, cool. And then inside of the default function, which I guess is now being called blog, still exporting it, yeah. So they're just adding that for a little bit more readability and understandability about what this is. We will return a layout with an H1 at the top. It looks like the layout is actually the top one now. So we don't need this div anymore, so we'll go ahead and delete that. I'll save it so it reformats it here. And then we have an H1 of my blog. Easy enough. And then we have an unordered list, and then each of these will return the list items because that's what we just wrote above. And here are the different titles. We have hello Next.js, learn Next.js is awesome, deploy apps with Zit, which I guess is kind of like their version of Heroku or their platform. So that might be something we look into towards the end here, probably in this deploying a Next.js app. I'm not necessarily convinced. I might do something like Heroku instead, but that's just kind of what that is if you're curious. So we'll delete this, and we have our unordered list, and we have our post links with titles. And they are self-closing. So we'll just copy this a couple times. And we'll do the ones they have. So hello Next.js. Learn Next.js is awesome. And deploy apps with Zit. I could be horribly butchering that name, actually. So once we have this content, you'll see a page that looks like this. Let's make sure that we actually see something cool. So we see that we have our unordered lists. Neat. If we click this, it should break horribly, right? Yeah, so we don't have a page called post just yet, so we'd expect it to 404 like that. We should still be able to do the about and the home, though, because those both exist as is. Cool. Next, click the first link, you'll get a 404. That's fine. What's the URL of that page? So the first one's going to be, it's going to be /post question mark for the title, hello Next.js. And the %20 is just the encoding for the space that exists inside of there. So passing data via query strings. We're passing data via a query string parameter, a query param. In our case, it's the title query param. We do this with our post link component as shown below. So we already saw that. Check the href prop of the link. Yep. Okay. Just like that, you can pass any kind of data you want, you like with query strings. Yeah, be careful with that if you're learning. Any non-sensitive data you would like with query strings. Create the post page. So now we need to actually create the post page. And that's what I was just talking about. So, cool. So it should exist now. And we have it. And it's going to, so it looks like there is a router. So we don't just have the links, we actually have a router, which is interesting. And I think the router, so that must be pulling the data or the query string data. So import use router, import layout, and we're going to create a const page. Okay. And import my layout components, my layout const page equals, so it doesn't actually use the props, so we can just have it be empty. And then, okay, so this one actually has some logic attached to it, so we can't just immediately return. So we're going to create a equals use router. I guess that's a function. Yep. And then we're going to return the layout with the title. Okay. So it looks like it's router.query.title. And then below that, this is a blog, or this is the blog post content. Okay. Okay. Oh, right. I need to add the my layout. My apologies there. There we go. So if you're new to React, the reason you can't just return to some top level things is you have to think about the fact that these are like those Russian stacking dolls, right? So these components kind of build up and up and up and up until you hit the root component, which in this case is our index, right? So this is like this my layout is the root component, if you will. And in order to render something, it can only render one element at a time. So everything needs to be wrapped. If you don't have anything specific and you don't want to write like a div, you can just do like some empty ones like this just to give it structure. But in this case, we do need the layout. So that works out perfectly fine for us. See, is there anything else? So returns. I guess I should have a semicolon there for proper JavaScript. I think I've relied on linting and prettier and stuff like that too much. So, all right. Let's try this again. And let's go here. Cool. So now you can see we're getting our title, which is this. You'll notice, though, that I can just change this to whatever I want. Hit enter, and we're going to get this. So it's going to give us the title foobar baz, because that's what the title is, and this is the blog post content. Again, secure info only and stuff like that, or not, rather non-secure info, anything that you don't care about people messing with, because you can just mess with the URL pretty easily. Cool. So here's what's happening in the above code. We import and use the useRouter function from Next.router, which will return the Next.js router object. So I guess that gives us everything. I'm a little bit curious about that actually. So like, what all does it give us? How much power do we get here? So it gives us the path name, the route, the query. So that's how we accessed that, was we did router.query.title as path, components, it looks like. Has some stuff there, and some just basic kind of stuff with the push, replace, reload back. The back is interesting. So like if I just like call router.back, and I try and like click hello, it's just gonna flash and send us back in time always. All the power. It's always fun when you find stuff like that, right? All right, cool. So let's put it back to where it was. I'm sure there's better documentation around the router object anyways, rather than just kind of poking around at it. It's probably even in here somewhere. Yeah, I don't want to dig around there too much right now. All right, in this case, we're using the router's query object, which has the query string params. Therefore, we get the title with router.query.title. Cool. As you can see, use router. Oh, there's the docs right there. Nope. Yeah, there it is. Router object, path name query, as path, with router, router API. All right. Let's access the router object inside the page. It's a React hook, and it works with function components. Cool. React hooks are a whole subject that I also need to kind of brush up a little bit more on. When I was first learning React, hooks did not exist, so a lot of what I've done with React is without hooks. I do have a slight understanding of it, which is nice. But definitely need to brush up on that. So that might be the topic of a future stream as well, just to kind of dive into hooks a little bit more so I have a better understanding. All right, so in the following example, you can see use router being added to a component other than the exported page. Other than the exported page. Oh, okay, so it's just that it's being underlying by having this content. Again, they just moved what we had into a named component, so it's a little bit more cleaner when you look at the overall page. I do kind of like that, actually, I guess. Like, I think it's really nice when you can get a component that kind of reads like a book. So when you come here and you say, oh, okay, there's a layout and then there's some content. Content might be a little generic for that, right? But it kind of gives an idea of what's nice. And they just took what we had a minute ago. Here's that. Yep. Okay, so perfect, popped up. So this is that fragment idea that I was talking about. So it has to have a root component, and there's this react.fragment that exists, and this is the shorthand for that. And that's what they're returning. You can also return an array, but it's not as clean, right? It's a lot cleaner just to write it the way you normally would, because that was kind of one of the appeals of React and JSX, was that it was a HTML-like syntax, which was familiar. Cool, so finally, now we've learned how to create dynamic pages using query strings. This is just the start. A dynamic page might need more information to render, and we may not be able to pass all of them via query strings. We may want to have clean URLs like this, localhost 3000/blog/hello-next.js. We'll learn all about these things in upcoming lessons. This is the base for all of them. Cool. So it looks like we're going to have some clean URLs coming up here. And I'm going to take another drink real quick. So in the previous lesson, we learned how to create dynamic pages with query strings. With that, a link to one of our blog posts looks like this, where we have the query param of title, but the URL doesn't look as clean as something like localhost 3000/p/hello-next.js. That reminds me of Reddit. Cool. So setting up URLs like that is what this lesson will cover. Before getting started, make sure you are using Next.js 9 or newer. I'm assuming I am because I just downloaded it, but let's take a look. So yeah, we have version 9.3.5. We are good to go. Again, we're going to skip all that because we don't need to do that. Dynamic routing. Here we're going to use the dynamic routing feature of Next.js. It allows you to handle dynamic routes in pages. Okay, so let's create our first dynamic route by adding a new page to pages/p/id.js. Okay, notice that you need to add the folder P inside of pages first, and the page is called bracket id.js. Okay, that's a little weird. But okay, so we're going to so we made our P directory here, and then we're going to touch pages. Oops, sorry about that. id.js. There's that very strangely titled file. All right. So first, in that page is called id.js. Then add the following content. Excuse me. So I'm just going to copy this because this is pretty much the same that we just wrote. So we just import the use router. We import our layout. I guess that's fine, just calling it the generic layout. So when you export the default, whatever we name it in the file isn't actually exported anywhere else. But I'm going to change it back to that just for consistency right now. Okay, so yep, we just have our router. So the only difference is that we have this router.query.id instead of, where was it? Router.query.title. And then this is the blog post content. All right. The previous page is special. Instead of handling a static route like about, it will handle routes that come after P. For example, /p/hello Next.js will be handled by this page, although /p/post1/another will not. So it looks like it only handles singly scoped dynamic routes. So having brackets in the page name makes it a dynamic route. Currently, you cannot make part of a page name dynamic only the full name. For example, pages/p_id.js is supported, but pages/p/post-id is not currently. All right. Is not currently. I wonder if they have plans to do that where you can have like multiple parts of it. Anyways, when creating the dynamic route, we added ID between the brackets. This is the name of the query param received by the page. So for this, the query will have the ID of hello-next.js, and we can access it with useRouter. Okay. Now let's add multiple links that use our new dynamic route. Use the following code. So essentially, the as is new. All right. So not a bunch different in the index, right? So this becomes /p/props.id, right? Change that to props.id. Or sorry, /p/ Oh, interesting. Okay, so we actually don't do the props ID there. It's the as that does it. So we actually want to make this just a string. And throw a slash in front of the P. Fine. And then the as is where we actually do the string interpolation. Cool. Then that is still props.id. And then down here, we just change title to ID and make these all one value. So it's just hello Next.js, learn Next.js. Get like a Vim plugin or something for this so it's a little bit quicker. Then deploy Next.js. All right, easy enough. Have a look at the following code blocks. So this is what we mostly changed, which is the post link. And the link element, the href prop, is now the path of the page in the pages folder, and as is the URL to show in the URL bar of the browser. I might need to look into that a little bit more. It kind of makes sense, but it doesn't. All right, so here, okay, but that's nicer, right? The /p. Cool. All right, now try to click on the first blog post and you'll be navigated to the blog post. Okay, after that, hit the back button and the forward button. What happened? It works. Right? Yeah, I don't know why they ask these questions when it's like that it just obviously works. But whatever. So clean URLs with dynamic routing. History awareness. As you've witnessed, dynamic routing works pretty nicely with the browser history. All you have to do is add the as prop to the link component. Let me look in here real quick, just so I have it for this section. Make it a little bit easier. Okay, so href, the path inside pages directory. This is the only required prop. The path that will be rendered in the URL or in the browser URL bar used for dynamic routes. So what happens if I just don't have this? Oops. Let me get rid of that. Does it still work, but it just has like weird... Okay, so it just does that. And why does it not? And if I just do the href like that, wonder what happens. See, it still works. I'm confused. Is it 'cause am I getting like 404s because of that? It's very strange. Okay. I'll do what they said because they obviously know more than I do because they're the ones who wrote it. Easy. But yeah, so I think it was just it was eventually finding it, but it looks like it wasn't finding it the right way. It was hitting some sort of 404 beforehand. All right. Cool. So that's the end of this lesson. If you want to know more about dynamic route checking or routing, check out the dynamic routing example in the Next.js repo and the documentation. Cool. Our next lesson is about dynamic data fetching. Let's add some data now. Cool. Batman. Hell yeah. All right. So now we know how to create a pretty decent Next.js app and get the full advantage of the Next.js routing API. In practice, we usually need to fetch data from a remote data source. Next.js comes with a standard API to fetch data from pages. We do it using an async function called getInitialProps. GetInitialProps can only be added to the default component exported by a page. Adding it to any other component won't work. Okay, good to know. Let's see here. With getInitialProps, we can fetch data for a given page via a remote data source and pass it as a prop. Pass it as props to our page. GetInitialProps needs to work on both server and client since it's called in both environments. Okay. In this lesson, using getInitialProps, we are going to build an app which shows information about Batman TV shows utilizing the public TV Maze API. Cool. I'll pop that open just for reference. I'm sure they will tell me everything I need, but just in case. So in our demo app, we have a list of blog posts on the homepage. Now we're going to display a list of Batman TV shows. Instead of hard coding those shows, we're going to fetch them from a remote server. Cool. First of all, we need to install isomorphic unfetch. That's the library we're going to use to fetch data. It's a simple implementation of the browser fetch API, but works both in client and server environments. So that's what they were talking about just a second ago, is that however we decide to fetch it has to work on the Node.js side and the browser side. So it looks like we are using this library called isometric unfetch. Cool. I'm assuming it's pretty straightforward. So I will just install it. we will let that install here. So I don't know if anyone's hanging out in the stream or not, but what's up if you are? Oh, that didn't work, so it looks like I probably typoed it, so let me just copy that. Probably should have done that the first time. Cool, there we go. So now we have that installed. Then replace pages/index.js with the following content. So we have our layout, we have our link, we have our fetch, so that's that new thing. This is a good chunk of newish things, so bear with me as I kind of tab back and forth again. So we're going to keep our layout, link, and then fetch. So this is like where I would probably do that. Then they have a constant index. So we're getting rid of this post link, it looks like. I'm just going to delete all this actually. Const index. And it takes props, then we have the layout. My layout. Batman TV shows. And then it takes or it's going to create an unordered list again, but this time it's going to actually just iterate over the shows that it has. So let me just create that unordered list again real quick, and then we're going to do props.shows.map. So for each show, it's going to take the data that is in that show's array, and it's going to transform it essentially in place into a JSX element here. So it's going to transform it into this list element. And the key itself, or the key for re-rendering purposes, is going to be our show.id, and then it's going to have a link where we have this /PID. So we're going to be utilizing that again, and it's going to be the show ID, and it's going to have the show name. So I'm just going to copy that because that's not really different. The only difference, I guess, is that there's this key here that's a React specific thing, and it's for the virtual DOM to make sure that it's not doing any extra manipulations that don't need to happen. So say we like insert a random show in the middle of our list, it'll do the minimal amount of updates instead of all the updates for this list, for all the list items, right? So inside of here, we're going to map the show. Yeah, just to make sure that was what they had. And there we go, cool. So that is the index itself. And then this get initial props. Okay, interesting. So let me reread. Oops. My apologies there. Went a little fast. Wait, where was get initial props at? It's in the, oh, okay, it was in the introduction. So, interesting. So they attach this thing, get initial props, as a property of index. All right. So it's an asynchronous function. We're going to await the initial fetch here. So this is the results. So here's the API call itself, and we are looking for Batman. Then we're going to grab the data out of that. So this is a pretty common pattern using the asynchronous function and asynchronous fetching. So we're going to await res.data. or sorry, res.json. There we go. And then we're going to console log it, which I guess is fine, not a big deal. Show data fetched, and then count is just going to be data length. Okay, and then what we're going to return, so I guess this is, we're just returning our props here. And in this case, shows, this is what we expect, and our shows are going to be an array of the show data. So each entry, I'm curious what other props are on here, but I guess we're just plucking this show off of there, which is cool. And then passing that along. So return shows, and it's going to be data dot map entry. Oops. And we're going to return entry dot show. Oops. Did not want to add that. There we go. And yep, just export default at the end here. When I tab too early like that, and it just gives me some non-related functionality. So everything on the above page will be familiar to you except index.getInitialProps as shown below. So they're kind of just zooming in here to talk about this. That's a static async function you can add into any page in your app. Okay, using that, we can fetch data and send them as props to our page. As you can see, now we're fetching Batman TV shows and passing them into our page as the show props. So let's see here. Do we in fact? Nope, we crash horribly. So let's see here. Cannot read property map of undefined props.show. Okay, wait, what do they call it? Okay, yeah, I just dropped an S there. So obviously .show doesn't exist. So it's going to crash. Let's retry this. There we go. So now we have our Batman TV shows. Batman, the Batman, blah, blah, blah. Cool, cool, cool. Looks like that is exactly what we expect to see. So as you can see, we are now fetching Batman TV shows and passing them into our page as the shows prop. As you can see in the above, getInitialProps function, it prints the number of data fetched to the console. Oh yeah, I guess we could check that. So it should just be that small amount. Let me clear this just so I have a better look into it. So it didn't actually put it in the console. Did I mess something up there? Oh no, it puts it, okay, because I guess the initial one is on the server side. Duh, I need to remember that. We're getting it here. So show data fetched, and we're getting the count of 10. Yep. Cool. Now have a look at both the browser console and the DevTools and the server console, then reload the page. Where did you see the message that displays the data count printed after page reload? It's still on server. In this case, the message is only printed on the server. That's because we rendered the page on the server. So we already have the data, and there's no reason to fetch it again on the client side. All right, time to implement the post page. Now let's add the detailed information about the TV show to the post. Replace pages/p/id.js with the following content. So there's some regex in here, which is cool. I guess I can kind of just skip that. The getInitialProps, it looks like it's going to get an ID or take the ID. So this must have an ID, yeah. So we can see that the /p has an underlying ID for it, which is cool. And it's going to make another call to that TV Maze API with that ID, await the information. It's going to get the show information and return the show itself. And it looks like the show is going to have a name, a summary, and potentially an image. So if no image, we won't render anything here. So in React, if you don't want to render something and it's something that might exist and you might want to render it, you'll usually use this kind of ternary pattern here. So you'll say like, if image exists, do this first thing, which is render out an image. Otherwise, do this other thing. So maybe you have like a default image you'd rather show here instead of this. So you might write this a little bit differently, but in this case, returning null is the same thing as just saying don't put anything here, and it won't mess with the flow of the page itself. So I'm going to grab all of this just because we kind of already did most of it. We will do this, export default post, cool, layout. I'll change that to my layout. Looks like we are not using use router anymore, so we can get rid of that. But above that, we actually want to import fetch from isomorphic unfetch, right? So that way that'll work. I need to figure out, so I'm not quite sure what this regex does off the top of my head. That is something I could also use some brushing up on, is some regex, but the rest of this makes sense. So inside of our layout, we're going to have the top be the name of the show. We're going to have one paragraph that has the summary of it, and then we're going to show the image after everything. Down here, we're just going to be showing the show name to say that this is what we fetched. Ta-da! So let's go ahead and do this. Then let's go to Batman Beyond. That does not appear to have worked. Did I miss something? So we have fetch in the layout. We have our layout. We have post.get initial props. Context.query is the ID. Let's see. See if the context shows up here. I'm probably getting ahead of the horse, putting the cart ahead of the horse here just to see. Interesting that it tells me that it's a pre-rendered page. I don't know if that's a Next.js thing or if that's Chrome trying to tell me something here. So I did not get anything here. Interesting. Okay, the first context is query object that we can use to fetch information. Our example, put the show ID from query and uses fetch show. Okay. What am I missing here? So we have pages /p/id.js, which is what? Oh, duh. It's because I was making the change in the wrong place. Let's see here. Is it // No. Let's see here. So all right, there we go. Cool. All right, but let's go home first. Let's go home, and then let's click on The Adventures of Batman. Sweet. Oh, right. Because I put that, so there's the path name query as path. Okay. I can get rid of the context now. That should be fine. Let's go home, and let's look at the Batman. Neat. We're not seeing that anymore. Cool. We should be seeing fetch show Batman. Batman Unlimited. Interesting. Interesting. Okay, so we start up the server. Cool. Then the page reloads. Show data fetch, count 10. Okay, that's all we see right now. I click on Batman. Event build page is compiled successfully. But nowhere does it say fetched show. Oh. No, it shows it on the server side. Okay. Or sorry, client side. So this is the client side fetching at this point. Okay. All right. So we see it in the browser console. Yep. So fetch data in client side. Here we can only see the message on the browser console. That's because we navigated to the post page via the client side. When we click on a link wrapped with the Next.js link component, the page transition takes place in the browser without making a request to the server. Okay. If you just visit a post page directly, so if we just deep dive to 975, you'll be able to see the message printed on the server, but not the client. So that's what we were seeing was if I was like on here and then I hit refresh, then I see it there, but I don't see it here. But then I see the data fetched here because I'm navigating back to it on the client side. Cool. All right, that makes a lot of sense. So next, finally, now you've learned one of the most crucial features in Next.js that makes it ideal for universal data fetching and server-side rendering. We have learned the basics of get initial props, which is enough for most of the use cases. You can always refer to Next.js documentation on data fetching for more information. Is there like, oh, okay, so there's the whole section down here with get initial props. I'm going to close this because I didn't actually need that, So a while back, probably, I don't know if anyone remembers at this point, but when the get initial props, that was kind of like what I was saying with the data hydration. So it's building it the first time, but then it's hydrating it with more up-to-date content as time goes on the client side. If it was like a real-time application or something like that, maybe that's when they'd start pinging it and pulling in data for a dashboard or something along those lines, right? So next lesson, we have style and components. We kind of already did that, so I'm surprised there's so many sections on this. Probably a little bit of a slog here, but that's all right. Looks like we only have a couple more things. I probably won't do the deploying tonight, but soon. And So until now, styling components was largely an afterthought, but your app deserves some style. It needs to look pretty clean, right? For a React app, there are many different techniques that we can use to style it, and those can be categorized in two broad methods: traditional CSS file-based styling, including Sass, PostCSS, etc., and CSS and JS styling. Consequently, there are a bunch of practical issues to consider when with traditional CSS file-based styling, especially with server-side rendering, so SSR server-side rendering. So we suggest avoiding this method when styling for Next.js. Good to know. Instead, we recommend CSS in JS, which you can use to style individual components rather than importing CSS files. Next.js comes preloaded with a CSS and JS framework called Styled JSX, specifically designed to make my life easier. Well, that was very kind of them. It allows you to write familiar CSS rules for your components. Rules will have no impact on anything other than the components, not even child components. That means your CSS rules are scoped. Cool. Let's see how we use styled JSX. Don't need to do that. All right, now let's add some style to our home page. So for index.js, simply replace pages index.js with the following code. That is ugly. But what if I don't want to do that? I want to have my sweet Batman TV shows. So I'm going to keep doing that one. All right. So we have our layout, our link, our get post function, which is essentially faking out what we already had. It's creating the list items. And it has this styled JSX at the end, but before the layout. So I'm going to just copy that. So I've actually never seen this before, this like style.jsx. I don't know how I feel about it. But it looks like we could just drop it in here. And then we have the H1 and anchors are both font family Arial. Our unordered list has a padding of 0. Our list items have no styling. So while they were links, it's going to get rid of that styling, and it's going to add a 5 pixel margin, I think, to the top and bottom. I always get confused on that. List style none. It's going to get rid of the dots. Anchor text decoration none. It's going to get rid of the underline. It's going to change it to a blue color, and on hover, it's going to make it slightly. It's going to slightly change the opacity, so that way we can tell that we're actually hovering it. It looks like. So let's check that out. And there it is. So yeah, you can see it gets a little lighter as we hover over. I don't know if that's super visible or not, but it also means that when we go back, it doesn't actually like show that we visited it, which isn't great per se, but it works. All right, cool. So, and they have it slightly tabbed in and stuff, but whatever. Have a look at the style JSX element. This is where we write our CSS rules. After you have replaced this code, our blog's homepage will look like this. So again, don't have a blog. Have the Batman shows because it's nicer, and ours looks a little bit like that though. All right, so in the above code, we did not write styles directly inside of the style tag. Rather, it was written inside of a template string. Now try to write CSS directly without a template string like this. What happened? I'm going to assume it's going to break horribly. Otherwise, hopefully they would have shown me this before instead of this horrible template string. Oops. Yep, we get a console error. Unexpected token. Right, because it has that dash in it. I think we touched on that before, that most of the time when you're doing CSS or anything that's written in JavaScript that relates to CSS, we can't have the hyphens in it unless it's obviously a string, which is what we have here. It's a templated string. So yeah, Styled JSX works as a Babel plugin. It'll parse all of the CSS and apply it in the build process. With that, our styles get applied without any overhead time. So that's good that it like strips it out, I guess, but it's still kind of like, I don't know. I'm always on the fence. Like, I love the idea of Babel plugins, and I love the idea of adding kind of more functionality to the build process and the parsing and actual generation of the JavaScript files and or rather assets. I guess I shouldn't say JavaScript files. I don't know exactly how it does the styles on here. I'm assuming it's still in the JavaScript file in some way, probably just inlining. I guess we can just take a look, right? Yeah, so it's just creating these classes, it looks like. And where is it making them? Here it is. So here's our classes. It's being generated. It's adding it to the head as a style. Here's our class name, like the JSX34451, blah, 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 blah. And you can see all of our, how it's using the same class name for all of these because it's applying the list item styles that we specified. But I'm still kind of on the fence about stuff like that from a Babel plugin standpoint. Seems to make things a little bit more confusing, right? Like, front-end development and web development should be pretty straightforward. I feel like we're adding a lot of layers of difficulty where they don't need to be, and confusion. So like, JavaScript used to be really nice in terms of just being able to pick up as a language, right, and get something up and running because you would just type in a file, right, and then you would open it up in a browser and voila, some JavaScript. You'd have an alert box that pops up. But since, the last few years with a lot of these build processes with Babel, Webpack, before that, Gulp. I'm sure there's other ones that I can't even think of off the top of my head right now from before that, where it's kind of created this barrier of entry to front-end development that kind of sucks, right? Like, it's not cool. So the more stuff we kind of shove in as Babel plugins, it's more stuff that people will just be like, oh yeah, you just install something over here and magic happens. And I'm not a big fan of magic happens, which is why I'm curious again about Next.js, if there's a way we can kind of eject from this mode that we're in right now, where we're just saying next. Like, that's our dev, is we're just saying run next. I'd like to get to see the guts a little bit more before really liking this. I like some of the stuff they've done for sure. And I definitely plan on using this for like a little mini project I'm planning on doing for creating like a fitness tracker, just for keeping track of my own fitness goals and things like that as I'm sitting around doing nothing in quarantine. But outside of that, I don't know if I would try and use this for a big project or what, or if it's just kind of an interesting thing, an interesting kind of bootstrap framework to get something up and running quickly. Anyways, off my soapbox now. It also supports having constraints inside style JSX. In the future, you will be able to use any dynamic variables inside style JSX. That's why CSS needs to go inside of a template string. So I guess this is just future-proofing style JSX. Interesting that they decided to take that route. Okay, styles and nested components. Now let's add a simple change to our home page. We have isolated our link component like this. So we have our get posts, we have our post link, which I think nope, so I guess it went back to what we kind of had earlier. So let's do this again. Oh, and then they're actually just doing a destructure on props, it looks like here. I'm going to call it show. Actually, I think I can just call it show. Because remember, they're doing something a little different. So they have posts, post link. It's the post. I guess because they have the key as well. All right, so I guess I will add that in. Then it looks like they just took what they had and they plopped it in there. So I will just take this, plop it in there. Looks like they removed the key here though, and they add it in down here. So this cleans it up a little bit, right? So we have this, and then we have oh, gotta close that off though, otherwise that will not work. Okay. So I think this is them trying to show that this will not work, right? Because remember, I think they said earlier that it's scoped only to the component it's part of, not even children. So having all of this means that our post will no longer look correct. Let me fix this real quick though. What the? Oh, I guess it still needs to. There we go. I got there. Yeah, so it removed all of the functionality that we had added because it's a child now instead of in the component itself that we added the style JSX. So I guess if we wanted this, we'd have to add whatever styles we needed here. In this case, I believe it's just LI and A. So like, I could take this. Here, let me take the entire style and add it here. I need it out here, I think, because I need it to hit the LI. So if I'm going to do that, I will do this as well. And then this should all kind of like tab over a little bit. Oops. Let's get rid of the UL padding, because that should already be taken care of, and we don't care about the H1 here, we just care about the anchor tag. And then here we don't care about the anchor tag because we have it taken care of in the other one, and we don't care about any of that, right? If we were to get it back to how it was, but scoped. Yep. So now we're good in terms of just like moving it around right there. Cool. So I'm sure the question that they have is what changed? Styles for H1 exists, but not for links. Yeah, right? Wait, did it tell me correct? Or did I click next before I, yeah. Submit, okay. So this is what you've seen. So we can see that, yeah, it dropped us back. As you've witnessed, CSS rules have no effect on elements inside of a child component. This feature of Style JSX helps you manage styles for bigger apps. In that case, you need to style the child component directly. And in our particular case, we need to do that for our link component. So, okay, so wait, I can add it inside the li, so that's a little bit cleaner actually. So let me do that instead of having this extra nonsense that we don't need. And we'll do it that way. I guess because it hits anything in the component, and since it was pre-processed, like I was just going off of a soapbox, or going off on my soapbox for, that makes sense. So yeah, it's still good, still looks good. Yeah, so they just had the li anchor, they added the font family there, which I guess would have made sense. Yeah, so if I were to clean it up a little bit more, it would be this, right? And everything still looks good. Otherwise, you could use global selectors. All right, so interesting that they just put that as a okay, so global styles next. I was gonna say interesting that they just kind of put that as a footnote, but whatever. So I guess you have this colon global. Again, not really a fan of this, I guess, but to each their own. Maybe I'm just a curmudgeon, who knows? I could believe that. Okay, global styles. Sometimes we do need to change styles inside of a child component. This is especially true when using Markdown with React. You can see that on our post page. This is where global styles come in handy. Now, try to add some global style rules with style.jsx. Apply the following content to pages/p/id.js. Before you apply the following content, install React Markdown component into your app with npm install save React Markdown. Interesting, but sure. All right, added it. Done, boss. All right, we're back to using a router again. What? Okay. Let's see here. Router.query.id, but I don't think I need that. Again, I'm just trying to keep this as simple as possible right here. We're going to add this markdown, I guess. Let's throw it in at the end here. This looks terrible. I hate it. I guess that's somewhat reasonable. Import markdown, obviously. Oops. And we'll add our styled JSX global here. Okay, why is it not like that? Expecting corresponding from my layout. It's I dropped a opening bracket there. Okay, so that should be fine. Let me tab that in for a little bit of readability. I don't actually need this ID here. I thought I did. Yeah, sure. Why not? Does this still load? Did I break it horribly? Here's my random markdown. This is our blog post. Yes, we can have a link, and we can have a title as well. Okay. What happens? Styles get applied to the markdown content. I'm assuming. Let's get rid of this. Let's see what it looks like without it. Very confused. Doesn't look like anything happened, right? I mean, it's adding a class to it with aerial display block, but for some reason it's not. It's not actually doing the markdown. Did I copy it wrong? Because I definitely just copied it. Okay, there it is. I guess I copied it wrong. I guess it doesn't like it when it's tabbed over and stuff. Right? Because I just tabbed it over like that. That breaks it, apparently. Oh, because this, yeah, okay. It applies it. So now if I remove the styles, oops. Now we can see it went back to the original one. So I guess they're saying that sometimes, especially like in the case of having a external component that we have no control over, in this case markdown, that it's useful to have global styles so that way we can kind of reach in and make those changes. I feel like you might want a global style anyways, like just to default everything to a certain typography and stuff like that, right? Like, does that make sense? Makes sense to me, at least. But yeah, here it is. We have a link with this title, and here's the content. Blah, blah, blah. Cool. So styles get applied to the markdown content is our answer, and we'll move on. Global styles work. Yep, that worked well. It worked because our styles applied globally. While this feature can be incredibly handy, we always recommend trying to write scope styles without the global prop. Makes sense. I mean, if we're going to use it, we might as well use it the way it's supposed to be. But we definitely want to avoid repeating ourselves over and over and over again. So global is probably a good candidate for things just like, general typefaces and stuff like that. One thing I've noticed on here is we haven't really... Okay, no, we did apply a class name to it and then scope it that way. Just kidding. So yeah, I would probably do that for some more common things. Still, this is a great solution over normal style tags with style.jsx. All necessary prefixing and CSS validation is done inside a Babel plugin, so there's no additional runtime overhead. Yep. We've just scratched the surface with style.jsx here. There's a lot more that you could do. Refer to the style.jsx GitHub repo for more info. There are a number of other styling solutions for Next.js that are pretty good, so have a look at them too. Like what? I guess I'll take a look at them later. The future is serverless. So I think this will probably be the last section, which is pretty much all of them. Again, aside from deploying, and that's pretty good for a little less than 2 hours so far. So just gonna go through and power through these last ones, and then that'll be some good stuff for me to sit on and stew on, and then tomorrow I can really dig in and start kind of seeing what I remember, trying to build from scratch, and trying to build up a new application just to see what that kind of looks like. So in this lesson, we will learn how to create and consume an API in the same Next.js app. So API routes, interesting. So is this like the replacement for something like Node.js, I guess? Before moving forward, learn more about fetching data for pages. We'll be fetching API routes inside of our pages. We'll create a simple API which returns a list of famous quotes and gets rendered on our Next.js app. The finished app will look like this. So this looks completely different than what we've done before. So I might actually do this. So I think I'm going to go ahead and actually clone this. So we will do git clone. Cool. And then we will open, I'm going to kill this real quick before I forget. We're going to open up 7.2 API routes. It looks like this one. See, we have all this in here already. We have Next React DOM SWR. I guess we will probably get into what the heck that is. And I will pop this open real quick. I will do an npm install while we read. And I will open up a new terminal just in case we need it for other stuff. So npm install, npm run dev. Yeah, I'll go ahead and run that here in a second. And then we can see kind of what it's doing. Because right now this should be dead. Yep. All right. So we run it again. Should kick off pretty soon, pretty quick. All right. There it is. So write tests, not too many, mostly integration. All right, cool. Creating an API route. API routes are lambdas, aka serverless functions, running on Node. Oh, okay. I feel like that's such an overloaded term, like the serverless functions and stuff like that, and serverless. I'm not even sure what it actually means. Like the core of serverless I've understood is that it's one-off executions of functions, right? So you don't have to have like a dedicated server. It'll get spun up when it gets hit, and it'll spin back down, so you can save time or you can save money. I don't know how much money you actually save. I don't know if you end up spending more money in the long run having these providers or not, but I feel like lambdas are not, anyways. In Next.js, every file inside pages/API is an API route. Okay. That way we can distinguish between a lambda and a React component. Let's start by creating a file called pages API random quote.js, then open it and add the following content. Let's see. So right now we just have the index, we just have the basic one. Okay. So we need to create a directory called API under here and a new file called random quote.js. So this is just going to be a function, and yeah, it's just a request response signature that we know and love from Node. And it's just going to return a response with a status of 200. I don't even know if we need to attach the status of 200 if it's truly a Node one. It should just, that should also just work, I believe. The above API route returns a JSON string with a quote and its author, res.status and res.json are custom response helpers added by Next.js. So I guess since this is added by Next.js, we might have to add status. Generally speaking, the default is a 200 good request unless you have some other reason to send a bad request of some sort, then you update the status generally at that point. Now open your browser and go to localhost/API/random quote. What do you see? So I expect to just see the JSON. Yeah, so it just comes back as JSON. And in the network, I would expect there to be some sort of XHR call for that. No? I guess it's just a document. It just serves up a document. Okay. What if I don't pass this? So if I don't pass this and I hit it, still comes back as the 200. Yeah, so like I said, most of the time, I think these libraries will kind of say like default a response of 200. It's good, I guess, that it's in there and it's explicit, but cool. A JSON string with the quote displayed is the correct answer, so we'll move on from that. All right, fetching API routes. All right, now let's use random quotes instead of single quote we currently have. For that, we're going to use the quotes inside quotes.json. First, if you didn't clone the starter code early in the lesson, you need to install SWR. SWR is a React hook for remote data fetching. Interesting, haven't heard of it. You can learn more about it here. Stale while revalidate. Interesting. I want to look into that a little bit more. Maybe that's the starting of next stream or something like that. If you haven't cloned the start, yeah, okay, I already read that. Oh wait, yeah, no. If you copy the quotes.json file, so I should have. There it is. So here's my quotes. It's an array. Inside of here, replace the content. So we're going to import the quotes from there. Cool. It would help if I can type. There's that. And then inside of here, we're going to just do a random function. So this is just saying, so this is an array as we just saw. So here's our array. It's an array of JSON objects. Each one has a key of quote and author. So what we're doing here is we're saying, given the quotes array, pick a random integer that's between 0 and the length of it. So it should just randomly pick something here, and then we'll have a quote. So the quote and the author is here. Again, this is the format of what we have here with the quote author. So we should be able to just pass the quote as our JSON here. And now let's consume our API and display the random quote in a page. So right now, I think if we were to go back and hit this again over here, we should get a random one each time. Yeah, there we go. Or a roughly random one each time, right? Out of 4, you're going to hit the same ones a couple of times. All right, so open pages index.js and replace its content with the following. So SWR, this one's kind of long. So let's kind of walk through this before I type it out, I guess. So we're importing this SWR library and I guess a function called use SWR. We're going to create a function called fetcher that takes a URL and it's going to fetch said URL and then get the JSON value from that. Interesting, especially because I guess use SWR. Okay, so that's going to give us the fetch, I assume, somehow. Okay. Yeah, I'm not quite sure how that's going to work, but okay. Then we'll get the data or error. We're going to hit our API random quote. Okay, the following line has optional chaining added in Next.js version 9.1.5. It is the same as data and data.author, so I actually really like optional chaining. I'm happy to see that it's being used in the documentation. Very nice. So we'll grab the author and the quote. If we don't have the data for we're just going to say the quote is loading. If we have an error, we're going to give an error message. And then we're going to create the stylized section, and it's just going to have the quote itself and the author. Let's see how different that is from here. So we already have the styled JSX. We have a quote, we have an author. And this is just saying if we have an author, then we'll put it. Otherwise, we won't have anything. And I think it's because one of these must... No, it just says unknown. So it should always have an author in the case of this one. But I guess that's kind of just future-proofing it. So let me just grab all of this. We kind of walk through it, so it's not as useful for me to type it out this time. Yeah, I'm going to look into this a little bit more. So let me just put a little to-do here. The only thing is because fetch exists on the browser side, but it doesn't exist on the server side, and that was kind of what we were just talking about. So I guess I don't know how it's going to do the server-side rendering of this if we're doing a fetch like that, unless this used SWR has some sort of polyfill that works for the fetch. Otherwise, I don't know why we're not using that same library that we were using earlier. That's essentially all that this is about and that I'm curious about. All right, so now we can go back to the home page. We should get a different one each time. So write test, not too many, every passing moment. Where there's a will, there's a way. Cool, so it looks like it's working. Yep. So there are some middleware. Again, that's kind of a little bit more advanced topic, but very useful. Again, maybe something we can dive into a little bit deeper when we might be looking at more things like Express, right? I think that's another area that I need to dive a little deeper into, so I'm sure there's going to be a future stream that has Express as a topic of interest. So middlewares, it looks like it says API routes provide built-in middlewares which parse the incoming rec, like rec.query, rec being request and res being response. I don't know if I said that earlier, but just when you read rec, it's request and response, and it's just the two-way communication that you expect any sort of web API to be making. Let's enhance our API to read query params and filter results accordingly. Place the content of pages API random quotes.js, or replace the contents with the following. So here's our quotes again, and it looks like we are getting a query. So it's saying we're only doing one for the author. Let quotes equals all quotes if author, then we're going to filter them. So we are only, so this is pretty basic, right? So we're going to say, given our quotes array, we're going to filter that array. So each quote, we're going to say if the author of the quote in lowercase includes the given parameter author to lowercase, then we'll keep it, otherwise we'll throw it away, right? I guess that's for partial matching instead of exact matching. And if we have some quote, let's see here. Oh, sorry. If not quotes.length, then we're going to return the unknowns, but only if for some reason we filter everything out for the author. That's what it looks like here. So if the length is anything other than 0, then we won't do this step. Otherwise, we'll do this step, and we'll just do another random grab of that, and then we'll return it. So that's pretty straightforward. Again, no need for me to really type all of that out at this point in time in the day. So the only change we'll make up here is we'll change this to all quotes. And then we'll have to make another change over here. So now we're going to add a query of the author here, right? So Yeah, let's see here. The above code reads author from the request.query object and filters the quotes accordingly. If an author is not found, quotes from unknown authors are used. Now let's update our page to handle filtering by author, open pages index. So here's where we're just going to add it to the front part. If I'm thinking correctly, the style should stay the same, the display should stay the same, the data quote should stay the same, and all of this. Really, the only difference is that we are going to be using the router now because we need to get the query params like we saw from earlier. So let me just copy that real quick. Let's go into the index and we'll throw that in here. So we're going to use our router. And then inside of here, we're going to actually use our router and we're going to extract the query off of that. So the little curly braces that you're seeing, that's object destructuring. So inside there's going to be an object that is returned on the object returned by use router, and one of those values is query. So that's what we're doing here. And then inside of here, we're just updating this to actually append our value to this search here. So let me just grab that. And let me get rid of this quote here. There we go. And I will move this up here because just to keep it all on one line while we're looking at it. And essentially what we're saying is now we're just going to that random quotes, but if we have an author, we're going to append the question mark author equals and then the author that's provided, otherwise nothing. And then the fetch is still passed in. So I think that means that if we do nothing like this, so if we don't have a query param, we're good to go, right? But as soon as we put and then we do like aman. Let's see. Ooh, failed to fetch the quote. I don't know if I. Am I using it wrong? Or did I copy it wrong? Let's see here. Interesting. So I may have copied this wrong somehow. Is it? So one thing I noticed is like I normally wouldn't have spaces here, right? Is it that? Is it here? Let me reset my server real quick. Okay, says it's good. There we go. So I'm wondering if it was that question or the spaces there. Yeah, see here, it doesn't have the spaces. But for some reason when I copied it, it had spaces in it, and I don't know why. Okay, so that was an easy fix. I should have changed that immediately. It kind of jumped out to me, and I thought that looked weird, but I figured, what the heck, I'll do what I copied, right? So be warned, for some reason it looked like that added spaces there. So now go there, refresh page one time. So the author is always that. Cool. So in this lesson, you learn to build an API with Next.js. By doing so, it's possible to have your backend and UI in the same app. We have a simple API, and we're only doing GET requests, but you can extend API routes with pretty much anything because API routes are simple HTTP request handlers. Next.js will take care of building these serverless functions for you so you can focus on building production-grade APIs. So I think that's an interesting thing. I don't know if I'm going to try and like restrict myself or try to write more API routes as I'm tinkering around with my app ID or app idea, or if I'm just going to go ahead and say, keep these things completely separate, have the server-side rendering and the UI kind of being its own thing and looking at having a separate API that gets called. I don't know. Maybe for simplicity, I'll kind of keep with the API routes, but we'll see, I guess. And yeah, so I think I'm going to leave this deploying for the next stream. So with that, I think I'm going to call it a night, and I will catch y'all next time. Later.